Hey, this is Leighton Taylor from ecommercepulse.com. I had a question about the post where I talked about how to add tabs to a product page in Shopify. And the question was from Melanie, and she asked about how to style these tabs so that they look better with the theme that you're using. And here's my demo shop that I'm going to be working in. And you can see that the product tabs here don't quite match the style of the rest of the site. And I did change the theme that I'm using. Right now I'm using the Kucher theme because that's the one that Melanie was using in her shop. So hopefully this will be easy for her to follow along and do something similar. So when you're working with styling and coding like this, I recommend that you use Chrome, Google Chrome as your browser, or Firefox because they make it easy to look at the code while you're viewing the site. And let me show you how to do that. I'm going to hover my mouse over these tabs. I'm actually going to do it in this bar here. I'm going to right click and then click Inspect Element. And you can see that this window pops up down here and it shows me the code. And as I hover over the different lines of the code, you can see that in the main window of my browser, it highlights what the area of the page that is included in this code. So specifically this line right here where it says UL class, this is the area of the code that includes the tabs. And then over here on the right, we have a column that shows me the CSS. So this left side is HTML, the right side is CSS. And HTML is what tells the browser what different elements to show on the page. So basically the HTML includes all of the content for the page. The CSS over here, called styles actually, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So the CSS tells the browser how to display that content or what style to display it in. And to actually change this, you'll probably have to do some research on CSS and what these different items mean. But a lot of it you can play with. And actually what I like to do is use this window right here, and you can add to, remove, and edit the CSS for the page. Now notice that, or remember that when I change the CSS here, it only changes it on my browser. So I'm not actually changing the website. I'm just changing how my browser displays it. So you could go to any website on the entire internet and you could change the CSS, but it wouldn't affect how other people view it. It would only affect how your browser views it. And then when you refresh the page, it would disappear and it would go back to how the website owner actually meant it to be. Just as an example, this is kind of a fun thing to play with. I'm going to go to my Facebook profile, and just to show you how you can play with CSS, I'm going to right click and inspect element. And then in this code here, I have a blue bar. And this is the bar that goes across the top. And if I scroll down here in the CSS, I see the background color is this hex code. It's a 6-digit code, and that tells it what color to display. And I can actually change this. So if I type in 333333, it makes it a dark gray. If I change it to something like 33 FFFF, it makes it some weird random color. So, this does not change how other people view Facebook. It only changes how this page looks in my browser right now. So when I refresh it, then it goes away. So you're not actually, hacking anyone's website. You're just changing how it appears for you right now. So then what we have to do is once we figure out what we want this code to be, then we need to go into our shop editor, the theme editor in Shopify, and we can change the code. So don't worry, this might sound complicated, but I'm going to walk through it, and hopefully by the end, it'll all make sense. So let's say that I want to edit these tabs to match the rest of this theme. And the theme is actually pretty clean. It has a white background. It has, a black background on this button, and it has square corners, whereas my tabs have rounded corners. So I'm going to work on changing this background from this gray to black. And then I'm also going to change these corners to be square rather than rounded. And then I might also change the font in here because right now it's showing a slightly different font from what's used in the rest of the site. And hopefully, as I walk through all of those steps, that'll give you some ideas of how you can style your own tabs. All right, so your Shopify site, your theme, has a CSS file. And let me show you where to find that. In your Shopify dashboard, just in case you're not here already, here's where you find your theme editor or your template editor. Go to Themes and then Template Editor under your published theme. And just so you remember, I always recommend that you create a backup by clicking Duplicate first. And I'm not going to worry about doing that myself right now because this is just a demo shop. But if you're working on a real live store, then you probably want to create a backup of your theme. So once you've created a backup, then click on Template Editor. And then in the sidebar down here, click on Assets. And then the name of your CSS file will vary depending on which theme you're using, but it's probably going to be something like style.css.liquid. In this case, for the Kucher theme, it's actually shop.css.liquid. So here we have all of the CSS for our Shopify theme. And when we view the front end of the site, over here in the CSS, you can see that right here, it shows us the name of this CSS file. It's shop.css. And if we look down here at these tabs that we added, notice that it's using a different CSS file. It's using jQuery-ui.css. And that's because when you added these tabs to your product page, you inserted a line of code that I'm going to show you right now. You inserted this line of code right here. And what this does is it tells your theme to look at this link and find this CSS file and use the CSS here to display these tabs. So you can't edit this CSS file, but what you can do is we can copy the CSS from this file to our theme, and then we can edit it, and that will affect the appearance of these tabs. So let's go ahead and go to this theme, or this CSS file, excuse me. So I selected the URL, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it into my browser. And now we see a bunch of CSS in our browser. I'm going to select all by hitting Command A or Control A. So now I've selected all the code, and I'm going to copy. And I'm going to go into my shop.css, scroll down to the very bottom, and then paste. Okay, so now what I did was I took the CSS that tells these tabs how to display, and I moved it, or I copied it from the original jQuery CSS file to my own Shopify theme. So now it's inside my Shopify theme. Before, we were referencing it outside of our site, outside of our theme. Now it's inside of our theme. And I need to save. And since we now have this CSS inside our theme, we can now delete this line of code because we no longer need the external style sheet. And we'll save. And then we'll just double check and make sure that this CSS is still working now that it's inside our site. Okay, so the tabs are still working. They still look the same, except that you notice the color is slightly different, and that's all right. Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. The reason it does that is because the gradient that was there, it used to change from a light gray to a slightly darker gray, and that was using a background image. And the image still exists on this site, jQuery.com. And we did not copy that image over, we only copied the CSS. But that's okay because we didn't want to use that image anyway. So now that we have the CSS on our own site, when we inspect element, now rather than saying that this tab CSS is on jQuery-ui.css, it now shows it in shop.css, and that's what we wanted. All right, so now let's get into the meat of how to actually edit this code. All right, a UL stands for unordered list, and then LI stands for list item. So the list, unordered list here, is the list of 3 tabs. And then the LI, or list item, is one of the tabs. So if I click on LI, I can then edit the CSS for that single tab. And I'm going to scroll down, and I'm looking for the border radius because I want to change these corners to be square rather than rounded. And in CSS, the roundness of a corner is referred to as a border radius. So that's what I need to find. Okay. Now here I see a border top left radius 4 pixels, and then I have a border top right radius 4 pixels. That's what I'm looking for. So 4 pixels is what we see right here. It's slightly rounded. And let's see what happens if I just change this as an experiment. Change it to 7. You'll see that the corner became even more rounded. If I change it to 10, even more. So I'm actually going to change it to 0. Now that's at 0, the corner is no longer rounded. And I'm going to do the same thing for the top right radius. Change it to 0. All right, so now my corners are no longer rounded, they're now square. And remember that this does not actually change your CSS, it only changes the way you're viewing it now. So you still have to go into your CSS file and change it. The reason we do it here on the front end is just to see what it looks like and make sure that it's what we want. And so what we need to do is we need to find this line of code in your CSS. So we're looking for UI-corner-top space bracket. So to find it, I'm just going to copy. Then I'm going to go to my shop.css. And then I'm going to hit Command F or Control F. And then you'll see this search box. And then I'm going to paste that line of code in. And it takes me right to that line of code in my CSS. And now I'm going to change this to 0, just like I did a few minutes ago on the front end of the site. And you'll see a few different versions. It says Moz-border, it says WebKit border, and then just border top. We need to change all of them. So 0, 0, 0, and then we'll scroll over and change the rest of them as well for the top right. Okay, so we changed that so that the border radiuses are all 0. We'll save. And now let's refresh and make sure that looks good. All right, so that worked. Now all of our corners on the tabs are square. Now what if we want to change the corners of this background bar as well to be square? To do that, I'm going to right click on that bar, click Inspect Element, and because we're looking at the entire list here, the unordered list UL, the entire bar here is the background for that UL, that unordered list. So the CSS is going to be right here, border radius 4 pixels. So if we change this to 0, that's all we have to do. Now again, the reason that they have a few different versions of this, Moz, WebKit, and then just border, is for different browsers. So you do need to change all of them so that this works on all browsers. So we just did it on the front end to make sure it looks good, and now we know where to find it. We need to search for this code in our CSS file. There it is. And we'll change all of these to 0. All right, looks good. Okay, now next we need to change this background of this box to black to match the button that we talked about earlier. So it's already got the UL selected still, and then we see the CSS for that UL. And right here we see background. And the way that these backgrounds work is they show a 6-digit hex code, and that 6-digit code tells it what color to use. If you need help choosing a color and getting that hex code for it, you can do a Google search for a color hex code generator or something like that, and it'll help you. It'll give you like a color picker where it shows you all the different colors, and you can choose one, and then it'll give you that code. You can also use a program like Photoshop to get that code. So let's just experiment with this and let's try a few different colors. I know that FFF equals white. So that's a white background. We had already said we were going to try a black background, and that would be 0000000. So there's our black background. So you may not like the black. I'm not particularly fond of it myself. It seems to be a little bit harsh right now. So let me try something a little lighter. Okay, there we have 6 9s in a row. So basically, as you can see, the lower the number, if you do all zeros, it's completely black. If you do all 9s, that's like a medium gray. And after 9, it goes to A. And then if you go all the way up to FFF, then that would be white. And then anything in between, you can come up with any different color. So if I just type in a random assortment here of numbers and letters, it gives me a random color. But you can find any color and insert it there. For now, I think I'm actually going to stick with kind of a medium gray. So I'll leave it at 888. So that would be in UI-widget-header. So I'm going to search for that code in my CSS file. There it is, and I see the background, so I'll change that to the 6 8s and save. And we're all set. Okay, one other thing I wanted to work on was the font, because right now if I select this font here, if I right click and inspect element, by the way, if you don't see any CSS here, or if you don't see what you need, then try clicking on a nearby element here in the HTML and see if there's any CSS for that element. So what I'm looking for is something that tells it what font to use for these elements. Still don't see it. If you don't see it anywhere, you can always try one other thing that I'll show you in a second. You can always click on computed style, and that'll show you all of the CSS styles that are applied to that element. So here we have font family Helvetica, comma Arial, comma sans serif. And what this tells the browser is if the user has Helvetica installed on their computer, then use Helvetica. If they don't, then use Arial. And if they don't have Arial, then just use any sans serif font. So we want to use the same thing for our tabs here. Right now it's using Verdana. So I'm going to select this code right here, and I'm actually going to copy it so I can use it later. And now I need to find out where this font is referenced in the CSS file. So I'm going to start by looking at the entire div of tabs here. And there I see what I'm looking for. Font family, Verdana, Arial, sans serif. And this is under UI-widget. So the only difference between this font and this font is that this one tries to use Verdana first rather than Helvetica. So I just need to change that one font name there to Helvetica. And that's under UI-widget. And I see that right here. So I need to change Verdana to Helvetica. And save. And there we go. Our font is now changed to Helvetica, so it matches the rest of the site a little better. One other thing I wanted to mention real quick. In Melanie's question that she asked, I noticed when I viewed her site that her tabs were a little bit too wide, so they were being bumped to the next line. In other words, rather than having 3 tabs in a row, she had 2 and then 1 had been pushed to the next row. And I just want to go over how to fix that. One simple way to fix that, the simplest way would probably be to shorten the name or the label of each tab, but I know that's not always possible. So what you can do is you can make the font smaller. That would be one way to fix it. For example, right now that says that the font size here is 1.1 em. So let's try changing that to 1.0. So you can see that the font was made a little smaller. And I'll go ahead and change that in the CSS. 1.0 you can use, or you can just say 1. That's fine as well. Okay, you might also, if that isn't enough to get the tabs onto one line, you might also want to try reducing the padding around the labels. So right now there's a certain amount of space to the right and left of each label. Let's try reducing that a little bit. So right now, let's see what the padding is. Okay, right now the padding is 0.5 1 And what that means is that there's 0.5 of padding on the top and on the bottom, so above and below this text. And there's also 1 of padding on the right and the left. So the first number here applies to the top and bottom. The second number applies to the right and left. So let's change the number on the right and left to 0.8. So you can see that our padding has been reduced. Let's change it to 0.5, 0.3, 0.2. So you can see that you can really just play with this padding to get it the width or the padding that you want before and after those the text on those labels. And just for fun, let's experiment with the top and bottom padding. So you can see that the spacing above and below changes as we change the first number. So that would also be helpful in getting these tabs to show up on one line rather than being pushed to two. Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. Melanie, thanks so much for asking that question. Feel free to let me know if you have any other questions. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.